30 January 1933, Germany. Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor, and the Nazi regime begins to reshape the country according to their twisted ideas of race, biology, and national struggle. Medicine and science are no longer seen only as tools for healing, but as instruments in a supposed fight for survival. Doctors are encouraged to serve the state, to strengthen the nation, and to remove what the regime defines as weakness. Hospitals, universities, and research institutes are gradually drawn into this system, where loyalty and usefulness matter more than ethics. While some physicians welcome the new order because it confirms their beliefs about racial hygiene, others adapt quietly, attracted by funding, prestige, and opportunities that had never existed before. In this atmosphere, the boundary between science and crime dissolves step by step by step. One elderly and highly respected malaria researcher will carry this logic to its most brutal extreme inside the Dachau concentration camp and will kill hundreds of its inmates. His name is Claus Schilling. Claus Carl Schilling was born on 5 July 1871 in Munich, then part of the German Empire. He grew up in a period when Germany was expanding its scientific institutions and colonial ambitions, and medicine was seen as a modern and progressive profession closely linked to national pride. Schilling studied medicine in his home city and completed his doctor's degree in 1895. He belonged to a generation of physicians who believed deeply in progress, rationality, and the power of science to conquer any disease. In 1896, he moved to the United Kingdom and worked as a general practitioner at the German hospital in London. This experience exposed him to international medicine and strengthened his confidence as a clinician. After leaving Britain, Schilling entered colonial medical service, working as a doctor in German colonies, Togo, and later in German East Africa. There, he encountered malaria on a massive scale, and he saw how it devastated local populations and weakened European administrators and soldiers alike. From this point on, malaria became the central obsession of his professional life. In 1905, he was named director of the Tropical Medicine Department at the Robert Koch Institute, an institution dedicated to infectious disease research and public health. Schilling was the first ever director of the Tropical Medicine Division of the Koch Institute in Berlin. He was also appointed professor of the parasitology in Berlin and became a member of the Malaria Commission of the League of Nations, an international organization that coordinated efforts to combat the disease worldwide during the interwar era. For many years, Schilling was regarded as a serious and committed scientist, admired for his dedication and expertise in the field of tropical diseases. In this atmosphere, society moved toward radical solutions. Extremist ideologies gained influence by promising stability, national renewal, and clear enemies to blame. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, science and medicine were rapidly integrated into the ideological goals of Nazi Germany. The German medical profession played a central role in implementing policies of forced sterilization, racial classification, and later mass murder committed by the Nazis. Research increasingly served the military and objectives of a so-called racial war. Although Schilling never joined the Nazi Party and did not present himself as a political figure, he did not oppose the regime either. His research interests aligned with military needs of Nazi Germany, and the new political system offered resources and authority to those willing to cooperate. After retiring from the Robert Koch Institute in 1936, Schilling moved to fascist Italy, which was led by dictator Benito Mussolini. He soon found his field of activity there. The reason was that when Italian forces attacked independent Ethiopia in 1935, Italian troops were exposed to widespread malaria in this part of Eastern Africa. Thousands of soldiers fell ill, undermining Italy's colonial ambitions and military effectiveness in the region. The fascist authorities were desperate for medical solutions, and Schilling was offered the opportunity to continue his work under their protection. In Italian psychiatric institutions, he conducted immunization experiments on patients who were unable to give consent. These experiments already crossed ethical boundaries, but they were justified in Schilling's eyes as necessary for science. The Nazi government in Germany supported his work in Italy even financially, seeing potential benefits for its own armed forces. During this period, Schilling's scientific ambition increasingly overrode any remaining moral restraint. The Second World War started on 1 September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. As the war expanded, malaria once again became a strategic concern for Germany, particularly for troops operating in southern Europe and other regions with high infection rates. In November 1941, Schilling met in Rome with the Reich Health leader Leonardo Conti, who coordinated medical policy under the Nazi regime in Germany. Acting on the orders of Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, Conti assigned Schilling to continue his malaria research in Germany. The location chosen for this work was the Dachau concentration camp near Bavarian Munich, Schilling's hometown. Concentration camp Dachau was established in March 1933, less than 2 months after Hitler became Chancellor. It was the first permanent concentration camp and served as a model for the entire system. During the Second World War, Dachau also became a center for medical experiments. Doctors working for the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, conducted high-altitude and hypothermia experiments on prisoners to determine how pilots might survive extreme conditions. Other scientists tested methods for making seawater potable or evaluated pharmaceuticals against diseases such as tuberculosis and malaria. These experiments were carried out on prisoners who had no choice and no protection, with terrible consequences for their health and lives. In February 1942, Claus Schilling, already over 70 years old, began his work at Dachau concentration camp. He insisted that his research was necessary and could be conducted without serious harm. This was a lie, and in reality the experiments were brutal and deadly. Prisoners were deliberately infected with malaria, often by being exposed to mosquitoes carrying the illness for extended periods. In other cases, extracts from infected mosquito glands were injected directly into the bodies of prisoners. After infection, the victims were treated with experimental synthetic drugs administered in doses that often ranged from extremely high to lethal. The suffering was intense, and the prisoners endured high fevers, violent chills, severe pain, and long periods of weakness. The victims of Schilling's experiments were selected from those considered expendable by the Nazi regime. At first, they were Poles, even Polish priests. Later, the victims were also imprisoned Italians and Soviet citizens. None of them volunteered. They were forced to participate and punished if they resisted. Some died during the experiments, while others survived only to suffer long-term damage that ultimately led to their deaths. Among the prisoners, Schilling acquired a grim reputation, earning him a nickname, Bloody Schilling, that reflected the bloodshed and cruelty associated with his work. In total, more than 1,000 prisoners were subjected to Schilling's malaria experiments, including approximately 200 priests. About 30 died directly as a result of the experimental procedures, while an estimated 300 to 400 later died from complications and lasting effects. The experiments continued almost until the end of the war and were stopped only on 5 April 1945, when Heinrich Himmler ordered them halted as Germany's defeat became unavoidable. The Dachau concentration camp was liberated on 29 April 1945 by units of the United States Army. The soldiers who entered the camp encountered scenes of starvation, disease, and death that left a lasting impression on all of them. Out of more than 200,000 people imprisoned in Dachau and its subcamps between 1933 and 1945, nearly 42,000 were murdered. Schilling was arrested shortly after liberation and brought before the American Military Tribunal during the first Dachau camp trial, which began on 15 November 1945. The trial included 40 defendants, including 5 doctors who were charged and convicted of violating the laws and usages of war. Schilling was charged together with other camp personnel and doctors for violations of the laws and customs of war. Evidence presented at the trial showed that Schilling had acted independently and with full awareness of the consequences of his experiments on the victims. At that time, there was no formal international code governing medical experimentation, but the cruelty of the acts done in Dachau left no room for doubt. The exposure of these crimes later contributed to the creation of the Nuremberg Code in 1947. which established fundamental principles for ethical medical research. During the trial, Schilling addressed the court in English and presented himself as a scientist devoted to knowledge rather than a criminal responsible for the suffering of prisoners in the concentration camp. When he begged the court to spare him and let him finish his research on malaria, he broke down in tears and claimed it would benefit humanity and help redeem his wartime actions. Schilling also stated, "I have worked out this great labor. It really would be a terrible loss if I could not finish this work." However, his theatrical performance failed, and on 13 December 1945, he was sentenced to death. Several colleagues from respected medical institutions submitted petitions for clemency, emphasizing his past achievements and arguing that he had not intended to kill the prisoners in the concentration camps. But these appeals were rejected. The 74-year-old Claus Schilling, a scientist and doctor who willingly served a criminal regime in his research, was executed for his actions on 28 May 1946. Just before the hanging, when asked if he wanted to make a final statement, Schilling replied, "I am not guilty. Please get it over with."